Hey everyone, I'm Simone, and here are some of today's headlines briefly. All right, Election Day coming real quick. Democrats and Republicans are bringing in the heavy hitters down in Georgia.
I just called Stacey up 3 days ago. Yes, I didn't even know a number. I was just asking everybody, you know Stacey Abrams? You know Stacey Abrams? You know Stacey Abrams? Finally somebody said, I know Stacey Abrams. And they said, I have her cell number. I go, give it to me. I'm gonna call her up right now. So I called Stacey Abrams and I said, Stacey, this is Oprah. You know what she said? She said, girl, let me pull over the side of the road.
Well, I'd like to remind Stacey of Oprah and Will Ferrell. I'm kind of a big deal, too. I got a message for all Stacey Abrams' liberal Hollywood friends. This ain't Hollywood. This is Georgia.
All right, so you've got Oprah and Vice President Pence out on the campaign trail making a final push in a super tight race for governor between Democrat Stacey Abrams and Republican Brian Kemp. According to our latest NBC News Marist poll, it's a dead heat down there, with Kemp leading by just about 1%. Now, if you remember, Oprah hardcore endorsed Obama back in 2008, but was super low-key when Hillary ran in 2016. So why is there so much attention on this race? Well, it's surprisingly competitive in a state that's usually predictably red. Kemp is also Georgia's Secretary of State, and people are accusing his office of suppressing the minority vote. And there's history at stake here, too. Stacey Abrams could become America's first black female governor. All right. In Pakistan, speech is hardly free. Citizens in this Muslim-majority country can get the death penalty for violating strict blasphemy laws. But something historic happened this week. A Christian woman who was convicted and sentenced to die was acquitted by Pakistan's highest court. Asia Bibi has been on death row for 8 years. She was accused of insulting the Prophet Muhammad. Now, Bibi's case was already incredibly polarizing. Some of her supporters were murdered. But now, after her release, radical Islamists are rallying in the streets demanding Bibi's death. This is a landmark ruling that marks a major human rights victory and possibly even a more progressive Pakistan. All right, guys, taking a hard left turn here. Kanye says he's done with politics now. Says he's going back to being creative. He took it a step further when he said he feels like he's been used to spread ideas he actually doesn't believe in, and it seems like he's at least partially blaming Candace Owens for that. So she's the right-wing commentator Kanye used to be cool with, and now conservatives like Ben Shapiro are saying this whole Kanye thing is backfiring for the right. See, Candace Owens announced this new campaign called Blexit, which represents the black exit from the Democratic Party. And we were actually at this event in D.C. where she handed out Blexit shirts and hats. And now Kanye's pissed because he feels like Candace led everyone to believe he designed all that stuff. Here's Kanye in a tweet. He says, I introduced Candace to the person who made the logo, and they didn't want their name on it, so she used mine. I never wanted any association with Blexit. I have nothing to do with it. Okay, so then Candace denied saying Kanye designed the Blexit shirts. She called that an outright lie, but the Blexit website originally said designed by Kanye West. And this is how Candace described the clothing at the event.
Blexit is a renaissance, and I'm blessed to say that this logo, these colors, were created by my dear friend and fellow superhero, Kanye West.
All right, so Candace apologized to Kanye for all of this, and her fans are still sticking by her, Kanye or not. Seems like Kanye's down for the cause until you put his name on ugly merch. Look, all jokes aside, there is an important conversation to be had about black conservatives. Everyone needs to stop pretending like they don't exist. They have a right to believe what they want to believe without being bullied or harassed. And we're going to get into all of that on next week's episode. But for now, those are your headlines briefly. All right, so if you go by the polls, Democrats have a real shot at taking back the House on Tuesday. Now, the Senate, on the other hand, seems like longer odds. Steve Kornacki is our go-to guy for the numbers. So tell us what's up, Steve.
All right, hi Simone. Well, over here at the big board getting ready for election night. We talk all the time about the House, about the Democrats trying to pick that up. But today, the Senate side, it's the opposite here. There are far fewer paths. This is what the battleground has sort of been reduced to on the Senate side. So let's take you through some of these. Here's an example of something that's been positive for Democrats lately. We had a poll in Arizona. This is a Republican-held seat, actually one of the few pickup opportunities for Democrats. Jeff Flake not running again. In the poll we had this week actually had the Democrat Kyrsten Sinema running ahead there by 6 points. So maybe Democrats get that one. You see, 43. Remember, they got to get all the way to 51. That means they need the lion's share of these seats right here. They've also, Joe Manchin in West Virginia. He's actually been looking pretty good in the polling. So, hey, maybe the Democrats are able to hang on in West Virginia. Florida, Bill Nelson, it's been close. He may not win, but let's say he's able to hang on to the leads we're seeing. Hey, how about New Jersey? Deep blue New Jersey. What the heck is this one doing on here? Well, Bob Menendez, Democratic incumbent, was on trial for corruption earlier this year, turned around, decided to run for re-election, got reprimanded by the U.S. Senate, has some of the worst personal poll numbers I've ever seen for a politician in New Jersey, and yet New Jersey is such a blue state, they may still want to vote for him just because he's a Democrat, just because he's not from Trump's party. So let's say that does hold him, and that gets Democrats to 46, but they need to get to 51, and that's about when they start running into trouble here. So we've been seeing this in North Dakota. Heidi Heitkamp, one of those Democrats defending a seat in a big Trump state. The Republican had double digits out there. Maybe Heitkamp pulls out a miracle, but right now, if that goes to the Republican column, puts them at 48. Texas, we have seen a gazillion polls in Texas the last couple of weeks. They all basically show Ted Cruz leading there. So again, if that goes to the Republican column, that puts the Republicans one away. Then how about a state like Tennessee? We had a Marist NBC poll in Tennessee this week that showed Marsha Blackburn, the Republican, 51 to 46 over Phil Bredesen, the Democrat. Just there. Those three states, you put those in the Republican column, they're at 50. That gives them the majority. Remember, any 50-50 tie, it's broken by Mike Pence, the vice president. So for Democrats, even if they get these to break their way, they need one of these to fall out of the Republican column. Let's say they made Tennessee competitive again, and then let's say Bredesen was somehow able to win it. Then they'd be at 47. Let's say they could pick off Heller in Nevada. No guarantee they're going to do that. Tester hangs on in Montana. Donnelly hangs on in Indiana. Look, I've given them 8 states. They're still not at a majority. They would still need Claire McCaskill to hang on in Missouri. Certainly not clear that's going to happen either. I've now put 9 states in the Democratic column, and by the slimmest possible margin, that would give them a majority over the Republicans. So there are a lot of possibilities and a lot of pathways that help Republicans maintain their majority. What the Democrats need is basically everything. So that's why it's so tough for Democrats. Not out of the question. In the same way, holding on to the House is not out of the question for Republicans. Long odds, different parties, different chambers, different Americas in some ways when you look at the battlefield there. So that's our update on the Senate. Back to you, Simone.
It's pretty much a free-for-all in the special election for U.S. Senate in Mississippi. In the jungle primary where multiple candidates are competing, there's a chance it could lead to a runoff. Our Vaughn Hilliard has been hanging out on a farm all day down there. Vaughn, can you first just walk us around where you are right now?
We are on, essentially, these are cattle pastures here. This is a large property that is owned by David McGee. He's a cattleman here in Oktok, Mississippi. And if you look out here, he has about 1,000 to 1,200 cattle that pass through his operation here on a yearly basis. Essentially, he raises them and then sends them to the likes of Colorado, to Nebraska, where they're essentially then harvested and turned into U.S. beef. And, you talk to David McGee here in Oktok. We're just a couple miles down the road from where the campus of Mississippi State University is. That's in Starkville, Mississippi. And when you go and drive around, Mississippi, you see a lot of pastures. You see a lot of farming operations of soybeans, of grain, but you've also see these cattle operations here. And when you talk to David McGee, they said that when they are paying attention to this U.S. Senate race and the politics that is taking place right now, he said that he is paying attention to his own bottom line, and that is the economy. And for him, he's a cattleman, and right now, cattle prices are good. He's positive about where this economy is, and that's what he's taking into consideration going to the polls on Tuesday.
So let's dig into this a little bit more, Vaughn. Why are farmers so crucial in this Senate race down there?
They're crucial because if you look across the state, this is very much of a Republican state, and agriculture has been firmly behind Republicans, but Donald Trump shored up over the last 2 years great support among a Republican base. And the question here, and why we're paying attention to people like David, is because there's a Democrat running in this special Senate election that you're talking about. His name is Mike Espy, and he actually used to be the Secretary of Agriculture under Bill Clinton, as well as being a former Democratic congressman. And he's thought of pretty well in high regards here across the state. And the most likely situation is that on Tuesday, there's going to be two individuals. One of them will include Mike Espy, then one of the Republicans, Cindy Hyde-Smith or McDaniel. And so the question is, come 3 weeks from now, when that runoff is there a chance that the Democrat could win in a state like this? And, well, talking to David McGee, who plans to vote for one of those Republicans, Chris McDaniel, he said if his candidate does not get to the runoff, he may very well be willing to vote for the Democrat, Mike Espy.
All right, Vaughn, thanks so much. Always love seeing the country through your eyes down there. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Does it feel like we never hear about the more moderate candidates who are running for office? They're still out there. Florida Representative Carlos Corbello is one of them. And today, for example, the Republican distanced himself from the president on immigration. So NBC's Snapchat show, Stay Tuned, spent some time with him and a few college students who gave him some honest feedback.
Tell me about, especially in this day and age, being a moderate candidate and the importance of that.
It's the most important issue in our politics today. No matter what you care about, whether it's immigration, guns, the environment, the national debt, unless you have people in both parties working together on these issues, nothing's going to get done.
This right here is really important to me, having conversations and actually work towards solutions. One issue that you sort of stand in the middle on, but I want to kind of hear a clearer view of yours, is gun reform.
So I think Florida provided a good model for what's possible on gun reform, right? We have a Republican-dominated legislature, a Republican governor, yet they worked with their Democratic colleagues, and there was some progress. The minimum age to purchase a gun was raised. They banned bump stocks. Good things that will make it less likely that there's another tragedy here in our state, at least.
As a young Republican, for you, what does his stance on gun control mean to you?
The way I see the Second Amendment, it's a right just like any other of the rights that we receive. We need to ensure that the people who have the weapons, who have the ability to protect us, know how to use the weapons, how to respect the weapons.
If you read the NRA scorecard, you'd probably assume that I'm trying to confiscate everyone's weapons, which is not true. But that right should be regulated just like free speech is and just like all our other rights are.
What do you think about the current political climate, and do you feel it's adding to violence? How does it make you feel? I feel like the current polarization in the government is encouraging anger and hatred, and it's allowing people to not be held accountable for their actions. As a young Jewish person who was raised to feel proud of their religion and heritage, I feel scared, and I feel like in 2018 I shouldn't feel how my great-grandparents felt in Germany in 1942, but the current administration isn't doing anything to make me feel safer.
When we see hate, when we see evil, it should be condemned, and it should be called for what it is. But if we're going to heal, if we're going to get out of this rut, forget about the organizations. They're just using people. But individual Americans, we actually need to convince them rather than condemn them.
So clearly, all across America, we're seeing divisions on the campaign trail. But today at Google, we saw a major division within the company at their campuses around the world. Thousands of employees staged a walkout in response to the way Google handled allegations of sexual misconduct. CEO Sundar Pichai spoke publicly today and said, at Google, we set a high bar and we didn't live up to our expectations. Now, I did a drive-by with tech editor Jason Abruzzi's for some more details.
All right, you probably heard today, thousands of employees at Google all walked out of their offices around the world. They all started at 11:10 a.m. local time, meaning we had people across the globe throughout the day, staggered walkouts. We've never seen anything quite like it. Here's the scene from Mountain View, Google's headquarters. You've got throngs of people walking out. These are some of Google's central employees, people who are all trying to make their voice heard within the company. You've got Washington, D.C., same thing. People walking out en masse all together. Same thing in New York City. Here's your aerial shot. You see the press. This was a big, big deal. They filled a park. People were holding signs. And lastly, in London, people were even braving the rain to go out and express their displeasure with this company. So this all started last week. New York Times reported that 2 executives had been paid sizable exit packages after they left the company amid claims of sexual harassment and misconduct. Another executive who had been incredibly accused was able to stay at the company, but he's since resigned. So what are these protesters asking for? They've got a series of demands. One of the most interesting to me is that they're calling for the end of private arbitration with these cases. A lot of times, if you bring a sexual harassment case within a company, it goes to what's called arbitration, in which you, in private, talk to the company, make your case, the other side can make its case, and then a decision is made and nobody knows anything about it. These folks, they don't want that anymore. They want these things out in the open so people know when there's been credible accusations and how the company's reacting. Protesters are also asking for more representation on the company's board, including an employee representative, and even for the chief diversity officer to report directly to the CEO. I think we're going to see more tech employees making their voices heard, in part because a lot of these employees are very valuable. It's a lot of competition for these employees, and they know that the companies can't afford to lose them and need to keep them happy and need to keep them at these companies.
Something else everyone is talking about this week, hate crimes after the horrific anti-Semitic shooting we saw last weekend. The suspect in the Pittsburgh synagogue attack entered a plea of not guilty and requested a jury trial today. Robert Bowers faces 44 federal charges, including hate crimes, and he could ultimately face the death penalty. Now, over in the UK, police are investigating another crime tied to an American hate group. 8 people dressed as members of the KKK were caught on camera in Northern Ireland earlier this week. Our British friends over at Euronews are tracing their whereabouts.
Well, hi, Simone. Welcome to theCUBE. This is our team of social media journalists right at the heart of Europe. And let me tell you, seeing people dressed like this in Europe really is shocking. It's out of the ordinary. People dressed in the white robes and hoods of the Ku Klux Klan, symbols of white supremacy. Shocking and racist anywhere, but particularly in Northern Ireland, where this picture came from, really out of the ordinary. This is also supposed to be outside of an Islamic center. Our first mission in theCUBE was to figure out if the picture was real, and indeed if it came from where it said it did. So, Emmanuelle at the screen here, well, we worked on it together, didn't we? And
yeah.
we had very little to go on to start with.
We had very little. We just knew it was taken in the vicinity of Greenwell Street. And then when you look at the photograph, which is in the dark, you can still identify some markers. So whenever our team geolocates something, they look for identified markers in a photo. So what we did is we went to Greenwell Street on the map, just like this. We dropped down at a street level to look at the images of every building.
Walking effectively down the street, but on Google, building by building, image by image, just looking for anything that jumped out from that rather blurry picture.
And we then landed on this white building. And if I pull that photo up for you again, just so you can see a comparison. So those markers we were talking about was the arch.
I mean, they're minor and they're subtle, but they're there.
They are there, and that's always what you're looking for, right? And then here's another wire here in the dark and a black door. And then when we were doing that motion of going down the street, I just stopped on this door and recognized the arch, recognized that wire, and did a side-by-side comparison, and there you have it. That is the KKK, or people dressed as the KKK, in front of this building.
But the next challenge, of course, this was supposed to be an Islamic center, but looking at this, there's not a single sign on it. So we had to figure out if it was indeed an Islamic center. By doing that, we had to zoom right the way back out. We couldn't reach them, so we had to call on locals.
We looked for other local businesses around, because that's usually talking to local people who can give you any indication of what's around, and we spoke to the Reverend.
I did, the Reverend of the local church, and he said, yeah, these are our neighbors. Yeah. They've been harassed before, but this town, our town, values them. And he says here that they're really valued members of the community, that this, whatever this was, these people dressed like this, was not reflecting his town. And we spoke to the police at this stage. They're treating it as a hate crime, but they're still investigating.
All right, this is a story that's kind of gotten buried by all the other news that's going on right now. So the Trump administration may be considering some changes to federal civil rights law that would ensure gender is defined by a person's biological genitalia at birth. So 2 options, male or female. Now, this is all according to a leaked memo acquired by the New York Times. So Obama loosened the definition of gender, but this would take the legal definition of it back to the way it was before. LGBTQ communities fear this will only invite outright discrimination. So I sat down with two people who are challenging this new proposal.
Title IX gave a legal apparatus that trans and gender nonconforming people could use to give legitimacy to their claims of discrimination. Now that the policy is being restricted, there's no legal protections afforded for the compounded discrimination that trans people experience. That sends a message to employers, to public services, that it's okay to discriminate against trans people.
When you're talking about employment discrimination, what does that look like?
Oftentimes, gender nonconforming people like me are seen as not professional. So many times when we're applying for work, people will be like, well, we don't want someone like you in the front of the counter, or we don't want someone like you because you're making this about yourself and your appearance, you're a spectacle. They're saying that they're discriminating on the basis of my appearance, but really that's my gender. And my gender identity is valid, one, and two, doesn't have any bearing on my ability to do work.
When you look at other countries around the world, are there any countries that you feel like are modeling the way that this administration, this country, could look at gender identity?
We've always just been so afraid of what's different, you know, in this country. And that's what's happening here. It's just fear-based.
I think this country is actually deplorably behind when it comes to the gender identity conversation, right? So in large parts of South Asia, Nepal, India, it's actually legally recognized to be a third gender. Across Latin American places like Argentina, they have models around self-identification.
Being part of a community that our rights are dependent on which political party is in power is a really dangerous thing.
How would you like this administration or future administrations to acknowledge the fluidity of gender?
I think that one of the things that we've been pushing for as a trans movement for decades is self-identification and self-determination of gender. Since this memo was leaked, calls to a trans suicide hotline have increased ×4. It's very difficult to wake up in a society, in a country, where you're told every single day that you don't exist. Imagine tomorrow, you say, hi, I'm, and then everyone's like, no, you're not. The schools are like, no, you're not. The employers are like, no, you're not. And then your government's like, no, you're not.
I'm most afraid for trans and non-binary youth. My life, for the most part, is going to stay the way that it is. But the work that I do isn't for me specifically. In bathrooms and locker rooms, those rules and regulations are going to change because of this legislation. It's just blatant erasure of an entire group of people.
So when this news came out that the Trump administration was planning to narrowly define gender, what has the conversation been like in your circles?
I never watched baseball, but a group of trans activists actually did a banner drop that said trans people deserve to live at the World Series.
At the World Series. One of my first reactions was, this is Trump and the administration using this hate, fear tactic to energize the base weeks before the midterms. But at the same time, what he's doing is energizing our base just as much. I have never seen this community come together in a way so powerfully that fast ever before.
Okay, everybody, it's that time of year again. Sunday, 2 a.m., we're pushing our clocks back an hour. Our friend Deborah over at NBC's Left Field explains why we get to enjoy that extra hour of sleep.
Once upon a time, everybody kept their own time. So it could be 12 in Chicago, 12:17 in Toledo, 12:31 in Pittsburgh, but then 12:09 in Louisville.
I'd be in a different time zone.
Yeah, you'd technically be in a different time zone. If you think machines are taking over now, exactly 100 years ago, we stopped being able to govern our own time in the US. But why? So as we learned in Scouts, I did not learn this in Scouts, you can tell the time by the sun. That meant that everybody could keep their own time by their own solar noon. As you moved across the country, there'd be a time difference of 4 minutes per longitude. So cities kept their own time, and there were hundreds of time zones. The thing is, we don't use the sun to tell time anymore. And it's partially because we started moving around this country really far, really fast. Think about the speed of transport. People walk at about 3 miles per hour. Horse travel would go about 12 miles per hour. Traveling slowly by horse or by foot didn't pose that much of a problem when you move through time zones. You might just show up at a town and be sort of late for brunch or something. Trains were just so much faster. Moving at speed meant we'd cross more time zones and get out of sync faster. In the 1800s, in 3 days, you could get from New York ever so slightly south. By 1930, in 3 days, you could cross the entire continent. And the train network absolutely exploded. In the 1830s, there was 23 miles of train track. By the 1920s, it could get you to the moon. And with all that new train track, things got seriously baffling. Check out this handy, easy-to-use train timetable. And it wasn't just the railways. People had clocks and watches, and with an increase of capitalism and trade, the pressure for order was important for everyone. So in 1883, 4 time zones were established by the railroads. And some people tried to keep 2 times for a little bit, but essentially trains became so all-encompassing and so powerful in people's lives that railroad time became the standard. So in 1918, it becomes official, and the Standard Time Act is signed. That means 100 years ago, we stopped looking up to tell the time and started looking down.
All right, y'all, that's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We will see you next week.